Let's discuss the Iranian position further with Mohammad Marandi, a professor at Tehran University. He joins me live now from Beirut. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. Iran has declared 5 days of mourning, and we've heard strong statements from the supreme leader. Can you just confirm with us, because Reuters news agency was reporting earlier that the supreme leader himself has been taken into a safe area or a safe space because of obviously safety concerns for him?
No, Reuters doesn't have any access inside Iran, and usually when they speak about uninformed, informed sources, if they're not named, then I don't consider them to be credible. What I do think is, though, important is to focus on what's going on here. The plane that you were talking about was a passenger airline that turned back. I flew into Beirut on that passenger airline. There are no weapons, but the reason why they turned it back is because they know that the Western ally, the genocidal Israeli regime, might take down a civilian airliner.
Sorry, Professor Marandi, can I just interrupt you? Did you say you were on that aircraft and it was turned back?
I used that airline to come to Beirut. I flew on that very same flight.
But not the one that the Israelis said that they would use force on if it landed because they believed it had weapons.
No, I think it's quite clear. I'm sitting here in Beirut. But that very airline, that very flight, it's an ordinary flight where ordinary Iranians and Lebanese travel on. But the Israelis said they were going to shoot down these planes if they have weapons, and they would shoot them, they would possibly shoot it down, even though they know they have no weapons. And then the Western media will try to say that, well, probably, possibly there were weapons.
Professor Marandi, I mean, let's make it clear. We know Iran's position for 40 years when it comes to Hezbollah. They train them, they supply them with funds and weapons. The Supreme Leader himself in his statement this afternoon said that they would continue their support to Hezbollah. I just want to pick up another point, though. The mood that we've been hearing from Hezbollah supporters of frustration with Iran and Iran's inaction, because Hezbollah is fighting on the front lines. 800 people in southern Beirut, in southern Lebanon were killed. We saw the massive explosion in southern Beirut, and yet Iran seems to be distancing itself from the entire situation, other than saying Hezbollah will continue to lead this fight.
Of course not. First of all, it's quite clear that Iran is supporting and funding this group. This group was what expelled the Israeli regime, the ally of your government, this genocidal ally of your government, from Lebanon in 1982. Iran supported it, and this National Liberation Organization liberated the whole of South Lebanon, including the capital, from the Israeli regime. That's why actually it was created. It was created in 1982 as a result of the Israeli occupation of Beirut. And this shows that Israeli aggression and brutality and genocide has nothing to do with Hezbollah. It goes way before Hezbollah. In fact, in 1982, when they were occupying the city that you and I are both in right now, the Israelis and their local allies murdered up to 4,000 people in the Sabra Shatila camp. You know this,
if we look at the, absolutely, we know this and it's documented, and we've been covering the ongoing situation, humanitarian crisis and civilian deaths in Gaza as well as Lebanon. But in terms of Iran's role now, it's crucial because everybody is waiting to see what Iran does next. And so far, Iran seems to be muted, other than pushing its proxies in the region to say, you take up this war.
Well, they're not proxies, they're allies. But I was roughly 1,000 meters away from the explosions yesterday evening. That I know that neighborhood because I lived near there during my sabbatical here. Those were apartment towers. Hundreds of people died in the footage that you're now showing. Hundreds of people died. They used bunker busters to slaughter these people. So when your colleague was saying that we have a cultural difference about life and death, no. The cultural difference is that the Israelis consider non-Israelis, Palestinians, Lebanese to be subhuman. And that's why they can kill them. And the Western media, because of their allegiance and their alliance to Israel, they'll try to change the topic. They'll focus on Sayyid Hassan
I mean,
Nasrallah.
Professor Marandi, on the one hand, the Hezbollah leader was revered by his followers in the Arab world, although his views on him became mixed after the war in Syria and his support for Bashar al-Assad. But on the other hand, the people of Lebanon here have been divided because Hezbollah has continued, with the help of Iran, to drag this country into war and bloodshed time and time again. They have launched major terrorist attacks on Israelis, on Europeans, on Americans. So it is not just that Hezbollah and the leadership were innocent bystanders being attacked by Israel. A lot of innocent Lebanese continue to be killed in this country as a result of Iran's actions in the region.
I think you are making a very misleading mistake. The Israelis were occupying Lebanon. They occupied one half of the country when Hezbollah was carrying out terrorist attacks, as you call it. And the Americans were occupying Lebanon. And back then, Hezbollah didn't even exist in when the Americans were killed. It had nothing to do with Hezbollah, but it was an American occupation. But look, let's be very blunt here. The fact is that the Israeli regime is using bunker busters to slaughter ordinary people. And your media will call this Hezbollah strongholds. But hundreds of people die in each of these.
We have said time and time again, Professor Marandi, that this was a densely populated area. Well, I'm asking you about Iran's strategy, and you want to spend the time criticizing the Western media when we have stood here and said time and time again that this was a densely populated area where women, children, the elderly were living. It wasn't just a Hezbollah stronghold. This was a neighborhood, a residential area.
So these are terror attacks. You acknowledge that the Israelis are terrorizing ordinary people. They're killing people by the thousands. You acknowledge that, just like in Gaza, they.
Professor Marandi, for me, I'm reporting on the situation on the ground. There are international lawyers who are looking at the rules of law and the way that the Israelis are conducting this operation, and I am questioning the Israeli government on a daily basis about the number of civilians that are being killed here. But we're also asking you, as someone who comments on Iran's strategy, about what Iran is doing in the region. Yes, it's very clear to us, and the ICJ, the ICC have spoken when it has come to Israel's actions in the war in Gaza, and of course now the developing situation in Lebanon. I've spoken to a number of Israeli officials about the death toll. So to just accuse the Western media of ignoring that civilians have been killed is also misleading. I'm asking you, as an Iranian expert, the fact that the Arab world is in turmoil and the Iranian leaders continue to issue statements to say, well, we'll just allow our allies or our proxies or whatever it is that you want to call them to continue this fight, rather than and hide in the UN behind a podium and say we're just seeking peace.
I think at the podium, it was the Israeli prime minister spoke and the global south walked out. And the West, which supports Israel, is the marginalized side. The world is changing. And the Iranians will continue to support the resistance. The West will continue to support ethno-supremacism, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. And we will support the victims, just like we did in apartheid South Africa. But this regime is far worse than in South Africa. In fact, most of the Arab world is in turmoil because they support Hezbollah and the resistance. And they know what the Israeli regime is doing. And no amount of playing with words and terminology will change the reality on the ground, that the Israeli regime is slaughtering people. However, Hezbollah is very strong. It has not been infiltrated. The only place where the Israeli regime has had some success is in Beirut. And the reason why it has had some success in Beirut is because Western Beirut is so badly infiltrated by Western embassies and NGOs, and they have been able to gather all sorts of intelligence over the years. But besides Beirut, Hezbollah has thousands of kilometers of very deep underground tunnels, and major missile bases that are very well protected. And if the Israeli regime tries to come into the country, they will be badly mauled. And Iran will fully support Hezbollah. And Iran will not allow the Israeli regime to defeat Hezbollah. And this colony, this ethno-supremacist regime must end apartheid and racism. And nothing that the Australian or British or American government tries to do will spare the regime from being swept away by justice and those forces of justice who believe that all human beings in Palestine are equal and that there is no superior.
Professor Marandi, thank you for joining us here on the program and for your time.